time. So on behalf of Casper, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our Casper members and guests today to our HISPER talk session entitled Heart Knowledge, Reflections Among Scientists. Today's talk is being brought to you through Casper's Health Workforce Theme Group, and we are really looking forward to it. I'm going to apologize up front. My camera is not working. We had a little bit of a Teams versus Zoom clash, we think. But I am here and I'm really looking forward to the webinar. Before we get started, I do want to take a moment, though, to reflect on where each of us are today, acknowledging that we're on Indigenous lands. I recognize that an acknowledgement of the land is really only a beginning, but it's important so that we can collectively and individually reflect on our role in repairing our nation's relationship with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island, now known as Canada. So today, it's with humility and appreciation that I come to you from the beautiful land known as the Haldimand Tract, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Six Nations of the Grand River. I invite you to include in the chat your reflections about the places that you live, work, and play. So today's presentation explores the concept of heart knowledge, which I find fascinating, and which can be described as the informal, experiential, and often unspoken knowledge that's gained through practice and personal reflection. In this instance, within the scientific community. This topic is particularly relevant to the health workforce, as it underscores the value of personal experience in shaping professional practice and in acknowledging the burden often carried by those working in healthcare. So I don't want to take any more time. I want to get right to the webinar. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Keenan Williams, and really looking forward to today's discussion, Keenan.
I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored that we're able to do this with friends and colleagues and have an opportunity or have space made in partnership with Casper and our workforce theme group and just the relationships we've developed over time. This journey started about a year ago for me, and I look forward to explaining some of these concepts and the origin and how we used it. But most of this presentation, I really want to focus on our panel. I really want to focus and when we get there, set the tone and set the stage to say, we can all learn and grow. And I guess the source of the idea is a very simple one. I'm a scientist. When I do science things, I noticed some work lacked heart, lacked spirit. It was good work. The methodology was appropriate. The quantitative analysis was fine. The qualitative analysis represented the voices of the folks that it was meant to be. And yet I still struggled identifying there were times working with Western trained groups that I felt had, it wasn't bad science. It's just I felt and I knew there were limitations to the work that I could not describe. And then in other settings, we had impacts that were profound, even though we couldn't highlight those in the evaluation reports or the standard processes of writing and expressing ourselves as scientists did not allow that format. So it's coming from this simple idea that if we bring our heart to our work, we do better work. So, how are we going to spend our time together? Come on, clicker. I'm doing this just for fun. This whole conversation, I want to have fun, and I want to have fun with my friends and colleagues here. If I'm talking to scientists, let's have an experiment. And this is what I'd like to propose. In today's webinar, I'll provide a bit of a background, and I already have. I'd like to propose a bit of a methodology or some questions for you, the audience, to consider to generate and hypothesize your own heart knowledge. And this is where we're going to segue into the panel. I've worked alongside these folks over the course of the year, and we've had relationships and working relationships for longer than that in many ways, shapes, and forms. I'm honored to be able to share space with each of these panelists and be able to hear and encourage the bravery of their stories, of how did they generate their own heart knowledge. I can only observe that in the time in this past year in particular, that they've generated it. So now we're making space to say, this is what we did. This is what the issue was. This is what we did. This is why it matters. And we share it to you, the audience, to say, if you consider these things and self reflections, you, like us, can do better work. Now, the experiment aspect of this, and I'll have a bit more description later on, is that I invite you, the audience, to do self reflections for 6 months from now, or in the upcoming conference, or some variation, whatever timeline you want to explore your own heart knowledge. And we'll come back to that. And lastly, I'm going to dovetail and segue into the Casper conference of this year. And let me jump then into what is the origins of heart knowledge. For me, it all started in Casper, the Casper conference last year. And Casper is the Canadian Association for Health Services and Policy Research. Thank you, Maggie. Um, and I want to say, for me, and be explicit on this point, I am Indigenous. I'm an Anishinaabe. I'm a member of Sandy Lake First Nation in Northern Ontario. And the only Indigenous aspect of this is that I believe that I'm a mind, body, and spirit. I'm just going to use the three elements right there. There's no sacred knowledge. There's no Indigenous teachings. There's nothing more beyond the fact that I believe in a person as more than one part. Now, this work led the opportunity to have a publication as an output. We started on the panel presentation, and it was a great presentation last time. I was able to seed the idea of what is heart knowledge, and I was able to do it remotely. Again, thank you for the accommodations during the travel considerations. As well, as part of those conversations, it led to this workforce truth and reconciliations, where I was able to bring my heart and say, mostly as a status Indian. Among Indigenous people, there is a legal difference and ethnicity and all these other considerations. I wrote this paper mostly as a status Indian working in a non-Indigenous organization. I enjoy and appreciate that I was able to share those learnings in that way and have these nice academic outputs. But honestly, I'm more proud that I get to work with Kylie, Jeanette, and Paula on this, and Chris and others. Um, Because to me, heart knowledge is a personal journey. It's a relational accountability, as quoted by Sean Wilson in Research is Ceremony. It's a chance to be able to say, I'm going to work alongside you for this reason to accomplish this goal. And in our line of work and the type of research I have an opportunity to do, it's always to the benefit of the health of others and to community members. So to have the opportunity to align with folks, do work in that path is an honor, privilege, and invigorating in its own right. I argue, and I have experience, that when we bring our hearts, when we open vulnerability, when we're brave, when we talk about uncertain things with people that are not like us or not like me, it's better and we do better work. And multiple perspectives strengthens the whole. So to me, that's what heart knowledge is. And I'll be on the record and say, I'm not going to ever formally, such great English, I'm not going to ever write down what heart knowledge is or definition. Even in this description, it's more of a process and vague. I choose not to write it down and define because I can only know what my own heart knowledge is. And the definition of your heart knowledge and the journey where you're at and your growth, hurt, harm, and everything else that goes along the way, that's yours to define. And we invite you to. There are spaces to hear that as well. And we want to encourage folks can be heard. So, to the audience. And I hear there's a class in here, so these could be a great homework assignment somewhere. My goodness. I'd like to propose that if you ask yourself some of these questions, this is how you can start hypothesizing and generating your own heart knowledge. So I don't care what work you do. Do good work. I'm excited for that. Whatever your work is, I hope you have your gifts and you use them. These questions are not framed in an Indigenous health realm. So I want to be explicit on that too. I understand it in that context because that's the worldview that I come from and work in. Apply these to your context, in your world, and how it best supports you. I'll leave it with just saying, what does your heart tell you? And how do you listen? There's a bit of self-awareness, but do you always trust your gut? Within my team, colleagues, and students, we talk about trusting that spidey sense in you. So if you have that sense, please don't push it down just because the Western method says don't introduce bias by listening to your gut. You're allowed to do that, just don't do bad science. Furthermore, from a self-reflectant place, what does heart knowledge mean to you? I defined it. I defined it for myself, and I feel better knowing what my parameters are, and also being able to have conversations with others and learn what there are. And I'm constantly learning and growing, and it's a back and forth and changing over time. I'm using a 6 month time frame just because we all like to use smart objectives, but pick your own time frame. 3 months, 2 months, 1 week, I don't care. What I really want to offer in this third question, what heart knowledge do you hope to experience in the next time frame, is observation bias in yourself to say, oh, I want to take a moment and be self-reflective. I'll use the language of heart knowledge. Oh, is this a heart knowledge opportunity? Before I raise my fist at that guy that just cut me off in traffic, am I going to touch with my heart knowledge and what am I feeling and how am I expressing that? Because that feeling and impulse translates into other behaviors in one's own life. So I just invite you to be able, that's my only reason and rationale for doing that piece. I should try to close that acknowledgement. And why are we doing this? It's not a frou-frou. Set a baseline. Where are you at? Journaling, reflective stage, and then doing nothing with it later. I want to focus on the word accountability because all of those and the folks on this call, they're not here because they did good things in my books. They're here because they were accountable to themselves in some way, shape, or form, which also led to improved project or research or analysis, governance, accountability, and ultimately just doing better work. So it's a very simple premise that if you're accountable to yourself and how you define your own heart knowledge and explore spaces of how can I bring my heart knowledge to my work to make my work better so that I can do better work, then you're only being accountable to yourself. And it's a wonderful choice and privilege to be able to be in that situation and say, I choose to be accountable to myself because I'm deserving of such. All right, I'm going to go off the camera here and we're going to get our Wheel of Fortune faces. If we can get us paneled up. Our goal now, we've got three other panel members, and I'm going to turn over. Oh, look at this. We're even so close to on time. It's even better. We've got Paula, Jeanette's being added, Callie, and myself. And to the audience, to the participants, just going to move this around so I can see all our faces. I want to say I was so mean to this group of people that you see on the screen here. We had no preparation. I purposefully kept everyone separate. I said, we're not going to do any pre-meet. You don't know. They honestly don't know what the other person's gonna say. To me, that's part of the experience. That's part of the experiment, sorry, because it's not about what you have to say. Or I don't want to be disrespectful in that framing. I don't want you to change your stories to tell a better story together. I want each of you to tell your own story. And why I'm so excited about this panel, and this is why I'm setting up this introduction, is because I set it up in this way, because we don't know. The only reason the four of us are sitting here talking to whoever yous are on the other end of this is because we each individually made the choice to be brave. We each individually had an opportunity and recognized and chose to talk about heart knowledge in different ways and settings. We could have been seen as kooks and hilarious or who knows what. And you know what? I stand by each of these individuals individually, and I believe all of us are stronger together as a result. So that's my segue piece. We've got plenty of time. I'm kind of saying about 5 minutes each. We'll do a panel presentation here, and then we'll move forward. I still have some other slides, but I think after this panel presentation, let's pause and have a bit of a Q&A discussion. So to those on the call, we invite you, if you haven't already been, please put any questions you have in the chat box. And just because I got an email about it, I think Ivy, your class is in there. I'm gonna put you on the on warning and say you guys have to come up with a good question between all of you. So that's your warning. I'd like to hand over the mic now, and let's just do our circle process. So let's go in the circle for the telling of this story. I'll guide and give timing warnings. We don't have any order, so I'm going to say Jeanette. I'll invite you first, Callie second, Paula next, and we'll go from there. And I'll give you, we're starting at 5 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning. We're probably going to go over. That's okay.
Thank you so much, Keenan, for setting this up. And yeah, I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So yeah, my name is Janet Jackson, and I'm a wife and mother of two very strong-willed and big-hearted daughters. I immigrated to Canada in 2013 and began working at Health Quality Alberta. So our organization is a provincial agency that brings together patients, families, and partners across healthcare and academia to inspire improvement in patient safety, person-centered care, and health service quality. So today I'm joining from the beautiful Blackfoot territory, where Treaty 7 was signed in 1877, and which is also home to the Otipemswak Métis Nation of Alberta. And I'm very grateful to be on land that carries the many hearts and footsteps of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So for me, when I think about hard knowledge, I think about what I have learned that didn't come from a textbook or a method. What I learned by being welcomed into relationship and by being corrected and by listening with more than just my mind. So early in my learning, one statistic really broke something open in me. The life expectancy gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Alberta. In 2000, it was about 7 years difference. When I arrived to Canada in 2013, it was about 12 years. And by 2023, it had widened to about 18 years difference. And this isn't just a number. It's the system telling a story about whose lives are being protected by our improvement efforts and whose lives are being left out of the averages we celebrate. So here again is the hard knowledge for me. Measurement can intentionally or unintentionally silence stories when it's approached through Western worldviews alone. If we only measure what's easy to count, we will keep making the invisible even more invisible. And we will keep improving care for the majority while widening inequities for people who are hidden in our reporting. So what has that meant in practice? During COVID, we partnered with the Blackfoot Confederacy and co-designed a survey to understand challenges that Blackfoot people experienced on and off reserve during the pandemic, including challenges that were distinct from the general Alberta population. Our organization learned from strengths-based approaches to measurement, and we learned how spiritual health and the barriers to practicing it matters to well-being and coping. And in 2023, we supported an Indigenous international symposium called The Spectrum from Indigenous Lens to Indigenous-led people-centered measurement approaches. Whose perspectives are we missing? This symposium brought voices from British Columbia, Manitoba, New Zealand, and Alberta into conversation about how ongoing colonialism continues to shape wellness and how the lack of Indigenous methodologies in mainstream measurement contributes to inequities. So now, today's webinar asked us to emphasize health workforce impacts where possible. So here's what my hard knowledge has taught me about the workforce. Health workforce well-being is not separate from reconciliation work. In fact, it's often where reconciliation becomes real, because the workforce is where people meet each other. When we ask clinicians, managers, and policymakers to improve, but we don't give them the tools that humanize the data or time and safety to reflect, they burn out or they shut down. When we ask Indigenous partners to carry the emotional labor of educating systems without reciprocity or control over their own data, that is also workforce harm, just unevenly distributed. So a workforce relevant shift I'm focused on now is, how do we translate complex data into something that helps people care better without defensiveness, and helps leaders allocate resources in ways that reduce inequity? This is the part of why we have been developing personas at Health Quality Alberta, using advanced survey methods in combination with qualitative interviews to create interactive archetypes representing different kinds of patient experiences that are very different, often much worse. And these are frequently among our most vulnerable patients. Personas help humanize those patterns so clinicians and policymakers can learn, reflect, and tailor their care, not just for the average, but for people who have been harder to hear. And here is my hard part again. Over many years, relationships have shaped my understanding of what it means to do measurement in a good way, with respect, reciprocity, humility, and trust. I credit those relationships with reshaping not just our own projects and programs, but my own responsibilities as a partner, a learner, and a settler working to combat inequities. So I will close with this. My hope is that we become the kind of scientists and system leaders who value hard knowledge as legitimate knowledge. Knowledge that changes how we ask questions, whose voices we include, what we measure, and what we do with what we learn. And if we do that, we won't just improve metrics. We will strengthen the health workforce's capacity to listen, to stay present, and to keep showing up in a good way. So thank you again for having me today, and from my heart and spirit to yours.
Say next in circle.
My name is Callie Chung, and I work in the area of public health nutrition with Alberta Health Services. I'm just really struck by your speech, Janine, and just your word, humanize. You know, when I went to school and I think about science or research, I think RCTs, and I think about these people in lab coats, you know, really white, pressed, pressed lab coats. And, you know, when you talked about humanizing, it just made me think about colors, splatters of colors on these lab coats. It's not, it doesn't, and these colors just enrich the approach of what we do and the learnings that we get for the sciences that, or science and the science methods that we apply in the work that we do. Well, I can tell you a little bit about my story, how I kind of worked with Keenan here and there, or just know of him in different pockets of work. But I think we formally started connecting about this when he presented to our public health nutrition team last year. He talked about Indigenous health and why we need to approach data collection and analysis in a different way. What I remember from that talk is that I didn't actually make it past the first couple of slides. And as most of you would have observed in this webinar, Keenan is very engaging. So it wasn't because it was boring or things were kind of put out of left field. I was just so struck by the idea he introduced. And he talked about data and how it relates to Indigenous peoples and just really some of those assumptions that we kind of just toss in as we approach things with the status quo. And he also talked about heart knowledge. So when I heard that word heart knowledge, it really connected with me. And then I think I got distracted. And that's why I didn't make it through the whole presentation. It's because I'm thinking about, you know, what is it? What is heart knowledge? He didn't define it. And I got a little bit upset. I'm like, you know, come on, this is a talk. You're supposed to give me all the definitions, put everything on the slide with bullets, bullet points. But I just kind of, I kept thinking about just that term heart knowledge because it really resonated with me. And now just thinking through, you know, the last couple of months, just this experience or what I'm asked to talk about, I'm really thankful, Keenan, that you didn't define heart knowledge because it's our own to discover. Since I've learned about heart knowledge, I find myself trying to balance rigor and objectivity with heart, and thinking about how can we approach research and evaluation design in a more relational way. And the way I've chose to apply it in the last couple of months is thinking through the design of the intervention and implementation of the evaluations that we might do. So, I mean, oftentimes we might think of just the outcome, the methods, you know, just the black and white, the white paint code, like the white lab coat. But I started thinking about, you know, how we might just the patient journey or the research subject journey or however term you want to use, but just that journey that people experience. So as an example, I'm currently involved in the evaluation of an Indigenous patient menu project. And I find myself thinking about just the patient journey. I found myself thinking about the menu. So it's about introducing menu items that are familiar to Indigenous people and just thinking about how that might affect their hospital experience. And I find myself thinking about not just the outcome, right? Okay, what instrument am I going to use? How am I going to measure usage, etc. I just thought about that, you know, when patients actually get the piece of paper, like the menu, what might go through their thoughts. I'm thinking about the experience, the distress, the backpack, right, of the stress of the health system that many carry. And I'm just trying to think about how, as just within my sphere of control as a settler, how I can make the design of the intervention as human, as relational, as ethical as possible. So for this evaluation design, for the evaluation of this project, we will be focusing on the journey from getting the menu to from the menu to the meals at the hospital bedside. So as a group, we're working with hospital liaisons, Indigenous hospital liaisons to design the actual menu. So the look of just even the menu how can we make it more welcoming? How could, does it make sense to add local dialects, language, images that really just welcomes people to make an order on the menu? So just to wrap up, Keenan's introduction of the concept of heart knowledge encouraged myself and my colleagues to reflect more on how we do what we do and not just carry on because it's just the way we've always done it. To me, research and evaluation is not just the data, the analysis, or the outcome. We can be more relational and have more heart in how we approach the design to support the experience of the patients, the subjects, and also the research and evaluation team that's involved with the project.
All right. Passing to me. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you so much, Jeanette and Kelly for telling your stories. Keenan didn't give us any information, any background, any guidance whatsoever. This time last year, that might have completely freaked me out. I'm like, oh, I'm not prepared. I don't know what to say. I need to. I have worked with Keenan and various other people on a project I'll tell you a little bit about, probably over the last 18 months, maybe 2 years. And I will say it has been transformative as we start to think about what is heart knowledge and how do you approach how you do your work. So I'll start with the classical. My name is Paula Robson. I come to you from Treaty 6 territory in Region 4, the Métis homeland. And I currently serve as Scientific and Program Director for Research Partnerships and Innovation in Cancer Care, Alberta. I'm a PhD trained research leader. I hold adjunct appointments at the School of Public Health and the Faculty of Agricultural Life and Environmental Sciences, because I'm a nutrition scientist by training, at the University of Alberta. I'm a first-generation immigrant to this land. I came here in the summer of 2004, thinking I'd be here for a couple of years and I'd go back home to Ireland. So I'm still here, 22 years later, and yeah. So I'm a senior research leader. I'm embedded in Cancer Care Alberta, and for those of you that don't know, it is a provincial entity with a mandate of delivering treatment and care for people throughout the province who are diagnosed with cancer. I'm at an age and stage of career where I pretty much know how to navigate the environment, which I typically work, kind of comfortable. But I'm here today to talk about heart knowledge, and this was where I ran into Keenan in the summer of 2024. And the connection was made as Cancer Care Alberta was trying to figure out how to answer questions that are coming forward from various Indigenous communities pertaining to cancer outcomes and experiences of their community members who've been diagnosed with cancer. So we can do things, we can sort of match with postal code if we're looking at reserves. We can't do anything for people who live in urban environments. And we do not routinely collect identifiers from Indigenous people. And as Keenan will tell us all, it's not a technical problem, it's a much bigger problem than that. So we don't have any way to systematically generate data or information to help those Indigenous communities tell the stories they already know to be true. They don't need data to tell their stories. But in the Western colonial way of doing things, we need data to be able to tell the stories. So somewhat naively, in the summer of 24, the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer had an opportunity, and it was me that was naive because I waded into this and said, let's do a project. So they had offered up $50,000 for 6 months to do some work. And I connected with Keenan and with Richard Oster from the Indigenous Wellness Corps, and I think passed the test because they agreed to work with us. And so I think I want to get into this story. And this is where my troubles began, basically. Being research trained, being the senior research leader, and like anybody with research training, I dutifully laid out the objectives, the methods, the timelines, and then rapidly learned that I needed to function quite differently and put aside a lot of things that had helped me navigate my career to date. And you can imagine how uncomfortable that is. I was starting to think about, I might actually need to be a bit vulnerable here. Going to have to be humble here. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't like this feeling of uncertainty. It actually makes me very anxious. I like to be in control. I like to drive things. I'm not in control. And also then started to think about how I bring myself, not the professional persona that I have as a senior leader. Well, those that know me probably would go, not really, but anyway. So bringing heart, bringing spirit to the work, and really being much more willing to look at things differently. So we started this out, and we ended up morphing into a journey along a different path where I was challenged very gently, but also challenged myself to tap more into heart knowledge than head knowledge. And we ended up actually doing something that I could not have envisaged. And the Samson Cree Nation very graciously invited some of us cancer people to go to or to host a health fair at the nation. And it was at the Howard Bull Arena. And we catered lunch and we brought lots of tea. And it created the opportunity to eat together, to drink tea together, to chat. And I likely learned a lot more from that day than anything I could have done in reading the literature or doing a survey or doing, what we would typically do. And that really is the start of a relationship where we can open up more conversations about data, about knowledge, and how the nation can direct us to get them what they need to tell their stories. It's been quite the transformation. And I'll finish up by just saying that day we were at the Samson Cree Nation, we had a huge snowstorm. And it was a bit touch and go whether we were going to get there, but we did. And I have to say the day was amazing for me. And a young woman from the nation gave me 4 little paper flowers that she had made, and they were tulips. And I still have them in my kitchen. They're in a little glass vase on the kitchen shelf. And every time I look at them, I smile. And I think of that day. And I think of heart knowledge. And I think of the transformation. And I am now in a totally vulnerable, humble place. And thank you so much, Keenan, for encouraging that and showing that there is a different way that I think will end up with better outputs and better science that actually answers questions in ways that we should be doing. So thank you.
This discussion is why I've been so excited for this day. I want to move to Q&A. We've got a little bit of time. Maggie, I don't know if you have any questions, but we're honored to be connected here, and I'd like first space to be with you. Then I'd like to call out, I think I saw Chris Watkins, you in there? Put your hand up. I'd love to invite conversation there. And Ivy, your class is third. Get that question together. But I'll go to Maggie first. And Maggie's muted or might have just stepped away.
There. No, I'm good. I'm good. What I want to tell you is I have never heard the term heart knowledge until I came upon this webinar and we started looking into it. And for me, like you, Paula, I'm from Ireland. And where I come from, storytelling is such an integral part of our lives and growing up. So for me, this whole notion around storytelling and what it can do and bringing those components of ourselves to our work is really inspiring. I never forget one time I was doing a media interview around data when I was at Kai, and I was telling a story about work in the ICU, about a family that had really touched me, where the young man had ultimately died of his wounds. But I always remember the CBC interviewer afterwards asking me to stay on the line. And he said, people quote numbers all the time to me, but having a story that connects you with the audience makes the world of difference. Never hesitate to do it. And I've been thinking about that today as you've been talking. And I've been thinking, so my question would be, how do we encourage that, particularly in the sciences, where where we're trained that it's the data that matters, it's the data that's at the core. And how do we find that balance between respecting the need for data, but bringing in that human element that will allow us to connect with people and that will help the data to resonate with them?
I'm going to go off script. I said I wasn't going to do this 5 minutes before this webinar started, but I'm going to go back in circle. I'm going to start with you, Jeanette, Kelly, Paula, myself, just responding to Maggie's comment and even responding to anything else we've said. And again, this is the live portion, folks. If you want any questions, put it in.
Yeah, I totally agree. So it's really, if you only see the numbers, what I even heard from patients and families, it's really, we are losing the tears behind the data. And so, yeah, it's really that human element that's really lost here. And yeah, just the number is not what it is. And it's really, the system needs to listen and really understand the story behind those numbers.
Kelly, do you have any comments or responses?
I don't think it's a trade-off. It just really enriches what we do. And it just, I'll just stop there and now maybe I'll pass it to Paula. And if I have anything to add, I'll come back to it. I just don't think it's a trade-off and it just makes what we do better.
Yeah. It's actually a really big question. I think for me, and you talked about telling stories, and at home it's very much telling a yarn over a cup of tea, and that was the experience that I had at the Samson Cree Nation. And yet, what I learned were things like that sparked in me that we wouldn't have from data because we don't have it. Where stories were told, and when you dig into them a little bit without re-traumatizing, it turns out that people have an idea that many of their community don't actually complete treatment, and for many reasons. That many in their community are diagnosed late for many reasons, and many are diagnosed at a stage where they probably should be getting access to palliative care, and that doesn't happen for many reasons. And I think it's there's stories. When we talk to researchers and we look at the training of researchers, I think that's probably where it starts. We have a very prescribed way of training researchers. We have a very prescribed way of thinking from a very Western colonial perspective of what is right and what is wrong. And I think we need to get a little bit better at not delineating right from wrong, but there are ways of doing things that maintain rigor and maintain the robustness of what you find, but that are not necessarily the right way. So lots of that kind of stuff, I think, starts at an early age. It needs to be encouraged, but the challenges are that we've got a very hierarchical way of overseeing research, managing research, and I think it's a huge cultural issue that we probably will take decades to unravel. But anyway, I'll stop philosophizing and pass it back to Keenan for his thoughts.
In response to Maggie, I want to recognize that. And in general, I want to piggyback and make the comment that when I work with epidemiologists and biostatisticians and population health researchers, I find it so interesting that data is considered truth.
Yeah.
Whereas I believe data is a perception or one piece of truth of which we're navigating to pull out the picture. So I'm gonna say I'm seeing in the chat box, Ivy, your class is gotta head out. So the question is, and let's respond to this, and then Chris, you're up next. To the new students, how can you not be indoctrinated with the worst of colonial Western thought and the best of yourself and bringing your own heart to what your future career will be, recognizing the trade-offs that I would love to do entirely heart work, but I don't think that'll pay my bills. So where do we do the practicalities? And to the students, in a practical sense, I will say, learn the tools. You're going to school to learn the tools, learn them as they're intended. But you're also allowed to challenge the fundamental assumptions of what the tools are intended to tell or teach. Use them to tell your story and use them to come from a place where your heart is appropriate. Anyone else around the table, not in circle, open comment to what do you want to tell Ivy's class? I got to leave in a few minutes.
I think I'll just maybe add to Paula and Jeanette's comment. Data is not objective. Data, you show a stat on a screen, and if you have 10 people or 20 people in your classroom, everyone's going to look at it a little differently and understand a little bit differently, apply a little bit differently. When we complement storytelling with the data, it tells the truth of what our patients, the patients or people that we're working with, how they are making the story that they want to tell. And I think that actually makes the number a little bit more truthful.
All right. Maggie, you had a hand up. Give you a chance to respond. Then Chris, you're up next, and then I'll go back to the slideshow and wrap us up.
Sorry, I think about the advent of AI, and I think about what that means when we think about the incomplete data that we have, and that decisions will be based on that data alone, as opposed to incorporation of heart knowledge. And you're prompting me to think about what needs to happen as things like AI roll out, so that they are more fulsome and robust.
Chris.
So hopefully you can hear me okay. Okay, fabulous. Because, Keenan, this is awesome. And I guess, speaking, one thing that I've learned in these spaces and around heart knowledge is that you go with the flow. So I was not prepared to talk today, but here we are. First of all, I just want to thank you, Keenan, for organizing this, and to Jeanette, Callie, and Paula, and Maggie as well for what you've shared this morning. So much of it resonated for me with when I think about heart knowledge. And actually, Callie, I'll grow one thing that you just said, because it really poked at mine. Was you said, when you pair the storytelling with the data, that tells the truth. But if there's one thing I've learned, it tells a truth. And if there's one thing that I have really learned, and I'm still learning how to do it, because I was also trained. So my background, I am also an immigrant. Moved up here in 2007 from the United States, got my citizenship in 2016. So I've been on a very long journey myself. So I was trained in very highly Western, very intense, rigid ways of working. And so, Paula, I was laughing audibly when you were talking about the objectives, timelines, and how you very quickly realized that you needed to check all of that firmly at the door immediately. But then this concept of a truth. And I've been so privileged to have teachers along the way that have encouraged me to hold multiple knowledges and multiple ways of viewing things together. And I'll give you a perfect example. In a lot of the quality improvement work that we do, one thing we love to do is like definitions, have like a glossary of different terms. And there was one piece of work that we were doing, and one of the First Nation leaders that we were working with, she was like, well, do we need to define it? Because you know what, you're going to see it differently, and I'm going to see it differently. And she called out a couple of names of the other participants that were doing the work. And it was like, well, what's the harm in us all having a completely different definition of that word or that term? And I was like, there's not. And that's just the reality, because we are all going to pick up that document or report, and regardless of how we try to describe it in the glossary, we're still going to put it through our own filter on our own lens and our own mind and heart knowledge to have it do a thing, and we're going to act with that thing. So yeah, holding multiple truths is a big thing for me. And then Keenan, you mentioned at the beginning just this concept, and then it's been a thread that's been picked up through this about bias, this concept of bias, objectivity. I've learned to really just not use those terms at all, period. If anything, I just describe my positionality on something that I'm working on to describe these are my biases. These are the parts of my identity that I bring to the work. So take that as you will. You know, whether I'm sharing something or reading something, I've just learned to almost like just disclose and say, I have these biases, and that's okay. In fact, it's expected and welcomed. And I think one thing that I've really appreciated as someone, if you couldn't tell, neurodivergent here, I have really appreciated that heart knowledge is welcome, because I was always taught to stifle that and mask that, when really that's actually one of my strengths. And I was being taught in those Western ways to actually stifle one of the strongest elements that I actually bring to the table and to the team and to these spaces to advocate and work together with my First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peers. So yeah, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you're holding this space today. I hope that you get to hold more space around this, Keenan, because I think the more that we can encourage our peers who are scientists, and just to be clear, my background is cultural anthropology. So I've always been fascinated and drawn to the things that make us different, which I guess maybe lends itself to being able to hold those multiple knowledges. But I hope that we can have more peer-to-peer space like this, where it can be okay. And we know that we're not alone, because in some research teams or organizations or entities, you feel like you're a salmon swimming upstream. You feel all of a sudden you start to feel strange that you're doing it differently from the rest of your peers, but that's okay. And the more of us that get around this circle and around this table, then we know that actually, you know what, maybe we're shifting it towards that, you know, two-eyed seeing approach, where we can actually work together and bring the strengths of both ways of knowing together and move things forward in service of those who we're trying to improve healthcare for. So thank you.
I don't normally put strangers on call like I do my friends like this. But Adrian, I see that you've been making some good chats and came off camera. I wasn't sure. Would you like to make any comments?
Great, thanks. So I think as I've been listening, I've just been struck by, in addition to the comments I've made in the chat, I'm enrolled right now in a leadership course, and so much of what I was hearing from all the panelists aligned with so much of that content in terms of the importance of self-knowledge and self-awareness in being able to not just manage yourself, but to manage and lead a team of people, whether that's in a workplace environment or a scientific research team or anything like that. And I was reflecting on, I don't know if you'd call it convergence, but it's interesting that so much of the content of that course and the recommendations that they make about the importance of those things comes out of Western scientific studies. And it's sort of yet another example of Western science kind of belatedly catching up and agreeing with knowledge that's been available from Indigenous communities for a long, long time.
Thank you and welcome. And also, thank you for your bravery too. Like, thank you for bringing your gifts and observations to this. I'm going to move us, folks, into talking back to the audience. So what's the point of all this? This is not for you just to sit there and say, oh, those were nice people. I'm not going to think about this again. This is your self-reflective time. You don't have to think about us. We know that we're awesome, and we tell each other we're awesome all the time, so we'll be okay with that. These are the prompting questions I want you to consider. Learn about your heart. What is your heart? How do you use your heart? How do you listen to your heart? Do you pay attention to your heart in the near future, and how are you accountable to yourself? If you do that, I argue you'll be a better scientist. So, on our slide on the earlier agenda that was a bit of an experiment protocol, This is up to you guys. I had, and in full disclosure, and thank you, Brenda, and thank you for your support, that we had considered, oh, I'm going to make a red cap survey and I'll have the usual, how did you find this evaluation webinar? And then, would you like to make your own heart knowledge? And we could set that up so that in a month or two, that's emailed back to you. I realized I didn't do it not because the technology doesn't exist, but because I actually didn't want to be accountable and responsible for the electronic heart knowledge of others. So that is a burden I place on you. And it's also a choice. If you choose to explore your own heart knowledge, what does that look like in the near future? You don't have to be accountable to us. We're not scheduling a webinar to hear about it, but there is space for you. So how does that look? And how do you grow your own heart knowledge network? So here's an option. Last year, this journey really started to crystallize for me using the term heart knowledge at Casper 2025. I want to come back. I want to go to Casper 2026, so that's in May, end of May in Ottawa. And I want to have space. If there's anyone here that will be there, let's take over a meeting room somewhere or a side panel or talk to Maggie and say, hey, we want some time to talk about heart knowledge. This is a follow-up to this HSPR talks and Casper webinar and connections. Now, here's the thing. It does need a champion. I know that I've been talking about it, so it makes sense that I'm going to, or that I could. I'm saying explicitly, I am not going to accept the responsibility to champion heart knowledge at Casper 2026. I'm glad to share my gifts. I'm glad if anyone else does anything anywhere, please use it. It makes us better, and I feel closer to everyone else on this call that I've worked alongside and shared this with. So I hope others do as well. So let us know how this looks. And I just want heart knowledge to breathe, grow, develop as everyone sees fit. And with that, I do want to say I look forward to Casper. Feel free to connect with us. I saw a message in the chat about can we make some resources available? We'll follow up with the Sally and team to say anything we mentioned, and if it's publicly available, it will. We'll send some links. I can probably share this PowerPoint. And otherwise, very excited, very relieved. And I'm glad that this didn't go sideways, considering how mean I was to my friends in the planning and preparing of this. But it just makes it enjoyable. That's my final comment. I'd like to go around and circle again. Jeanette, Callie, Paula, and then Maggie, you got final word after Paula.
It was an incredible experience, and yeah, thank you for always challenging us. And yeah, it's great also to hear from Paula and Kelly. Yeah, thank you.
Much to add, just appreciating the journey and all the challenges and learnings that come with it, and the friends that we make along the way.
Yeah, and thank you for creating this space to do this. And again, the vulnerability that comes with just literally putting your heart out there in front of a bunch of people who we don't know is a very powerful thing. And thank you again for providing the opportunity to share and for people to buy into what each of us is saying about our personal journeys along this path. So thank you.
So I don't think that I'm alone in coming away from today's talk with much to think about and reflect on. I want to thank each of you for bringing your insights. You know, a number of times throughout the webinar, things would just resonate with me, and I think, oh yeah, I can do that differently, or I should be doing that differently, or why didn't I think of doing that differently? So I want to thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable and to tell your stories. And I want to thank Brenda and the theme group for bringing us such a thought-provoking talk and introducing us to this whole concept of heart knowledge. Thank you, Keenan. Thank you to all of you. Before you leave us today, I just have a couple of reminders for you. On March 10th, Statistics Canada will be our guest on HISPR Talks, talking about the continuum of data access. They'll be talking about microdata, including self-serve options, and how to apply to access confidential microdata. And following up on Keenan's comment, the CASPR conference is coming up in Ottawa from May 25th to the 28th. Registration is going to open at the end of February, so keep your eye out for announcements about that. I just want to tell you, we had a record number of abstract submissions this year, so we are very excited. The program is really shaping up to be outstanding, so mark your calendars and stay tuned. And in the meantime, once again, I want to thank each of you for joining us. I want to thank our panel, and I hope the rest of your day is both successful and enjoyable, and that you have an opportunity to bring your heart into your work. So thank you so much for joining us today.